The snow came down in sheets that Christmas Eve of 1883, turning Knights Ferry, California into something out of a fever dream, and Willa Sutherland knew she was going to die out here in the white silence if she didn't find shelter soon. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, maybe two, she couldn't tell anymore, and the thin wool shawl she'd stolen from the boarding house in Sacramento did nothing against the bitter cold that had descended on the Sierra Nevada foothills like God's own punishment. She stumbled through a drift that came up to her knees, her worn boots letting in water with every step, and tried to remember why she'd thought running was better than staying. The answer came quick enough, sharp as a knife between her ribs, because Marcus Webb would have killed her eventually, just like he'd killed that girl in San Francisco, and Willa had been fool enough to see it happen. She'd been working as a seamstress in the boarding house, mending shirts and taking in dresses for the ladies who could afford such luxuries, when she'd gone up to Marcus's room to deliver his laundered clothes. The door had been cracked open, and through it she'd seen him standing over the body of a young woman, blood on his hands and that cold, empty look in his eyes that she'd seen before but never understood until that moment. He'd looked up, met her gaze, and smiled. That smile had sent her running, grabbing what little she could carry and fleeing into the night. She'd made it to the railway station, bought a ticket south with the few dollars she'd saved, but the train had only gone as far as Knights Ferry before the snow had forced it to stop. The conductor had told everyone they'd be stuck there until the tracks were clear. Maybe a day, maybe 3, but Willa couldn't wait. Marcus had connections everywhere, men who owed him favors, and she knew he'd come looking. So she'd walked out into the storm, thinking she could make it to the next town, to somewhere safe. But the snow had gotten worse and the temperature had dropped, and now she was lost in a landscape that had turned hostile and unfamiliar. Her breath came in short gasps that froze in the air before her face, and her legs felt like lead. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The wind howled through the trees, shaking loose great clumps of snow that fell like silent thunder, and Willa knew with a clarity that cut through the cold that she'd made a terrible mistake. Better to have taken her chances with the law, with Marcus's lies and influence, than to die alone in the wilderness. She fell, her knees hitting hard earth beneath the snow, and couldn't find the strength to rise. The world had gone white and gray, the storm erasing everything, and she thought maybe this was what dying felt like. Not painful, just tired. So tired. She closed her eyes and felt the snow settling on her eyelashes, on her hair, covering her like a burial shroud. That was when she heard the horse. The sound came through the wind, the steady clop of hooves on frozen ground, and then a voice, deep and concerned, cutting through her fading consciousness. Jesus Christ, there's someone out here. Strong hands lifted her, and she forced her eyes open to see a man's face above her, shadowed by the brim of a wide hat crusted with snow. He had dark eyes, she noticed, dark eyes full of worry, and a scar that ran along his jaw like a pale thread. "Can you hear me?" he asked, and his voice was rough like gravel but somehow gentle at the same time. "Miss, can you hear me?" She tried to answer, but her lips wouldn't work properly, and all that came out was a small sound that might have been yes or might have been nothing at all. "I've got you," he said, lifting her easily despite her waterlogged clothes. "I've got you now." He carried her to his horse, a big bay gelding that stood patient in the storm, and somehow managed to get her up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. He wrapped his coat around her, heavy leather and sheepskin that smelled of horses and wood smoke, and pulled her back against his chest. "My place isn't far," he said into her ear, and she felt the rumble of his voice through his chest. "You just hold on, you hear me? Just hold on." She tried to hold on, tried to grip the saddle horn, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. He must have noticed because he wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her secure, while the other hand held the reins. The horse moved forward, picking its way carefully through the snow, and Willa felt herself drifting in and out of awareness. She caught impressions: the warmth of the man behind her, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the endless white of the storm, and underneath it all, a prayer she hadn't said since she was a child. Please, God, please let me live. She didn't know how long they rode. Time had lost all meaning, stretched thin and strange by the cold and exhaustion. But eventually she felt the horse stop, heard the man's voice calling out, and then there were other voices, the creak of a door opening, blessed warmth rushing out to meet them. "Good Lord, Grayson, what have you found?" A woman's voice, older, full of authority. "Found her in the snow, Mrs. Patterson. She's about frozen through." That was the man, Grayson, his arm still tight around Willa's waist as he dismounted and brought her down with him. "Bring her inside, quickly now. I'll get the fire built up and water heating." Willa felt herself being carried again, through a doorway and into warmth that hurt, actually hurt, after the numbing cold. She whimpered without meaning to, and the man's arms tightened around her. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts. That means you're alive. That's good." He laid her down on something soft, a bed or a couch, and she felt hands removing her wet clothes, the efficient, no-nonsense touches of the older woman. A blanket, thick and warm, was wrapped around her, and then another, and something hot was pressed to her lips. "Drink," the woman ordered, and Willa drank, the liquid burning down her throat. Whiskey, she realized, mixed with something sweet. Honey, maybe. "That's it," the woman encouraged. "Get that down. Warm you from the inside." Slowly, painfully, feeling began to return to her extremities. It felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into her hands and feet, and she gasped, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "The pain means you'll keep your fingers and toes," the older woman said, not unkindly. "Another hour out there and you'd have lost them for sure. What were you thinking, girl, going out in weather like this?" Willa tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. The woman made a disapproving sound and piled another blanket on top of her. "Let her warm up first, Mrs. Patterson," Grayson said from somewhere behind her. "Questions can wait." Willa turned her head, trying to see him, and caught a better look at her rescuer in the firelight. He was tall. She could see that even with him standing across the room, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked hard for his living. He'd taken off his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, longer than was fashionable, and that scar on his jaw was more prominent now. He looked to be maybe 30, give or take a few years, with the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. As she watched, he met her eyes, and something in his expression softened. "You're safe now," he said, and it sounded like a promise. Mrs. Patterson, who turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes, fussed over Willa for the next several hours. She brought more hot drinks, savory broth this time, and helped Willa sit up enough to eat some bread soaked in milk. Gradually, the terrible cold that had settled into Willa's bones began to recede, replaced by a warmth that made her drowsy and soft. "You'll sleep here tonight, Mrs. Patterson declared. "This is Grayson's house, but don't you worry. He's a gentleman, and I'll be staying to make sure everything's proper. Can't have folks talking." "Where will he sleep?" Willa managed to ask, her voice rough and scratchy. "Barn, most likely," Mrs. Patterson said with a shrug. "Won't be the first time. Man slept in worse places, I'd wager." Willa wanted to protest, to say that she couldn't put him out of his own home, but exhaustion dragged at her like an anchor, and her eyes kept drifting closed. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of the wind howling outside, and a deep gratitude that she was here, inside, alive. She woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through a window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she didn't know where she was, and panic seized her, but then memory returned in a rush. The storm, the cold, the man who'd found her. She sat up, finding herself dressed in a clean nightgown that was too big for her, and looked around. The room was small but tidy, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. A chest of drawers stood against one wall, a washstand with a basin and pitcher against another. The bed she lay in was a real bed with a rope frame and a corn husk mattress, and the quilts piled on top of her were beautifully made, intricate patterns of blues and greens and golds. A fire burned in a small fireplace, keeping the room warm, and through the open door she could see into the main room of the house. She heard voices, low and conversational, and recognized Mrs. Patterson's brisk tones and Grayson's deeper rumble. Slowly testing her body, Willa swung her legs out of bed. Her feet were tender and sore, but they worked, and when she flexed her fingers she found them stiff but functional. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks. "You're awake." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. "Good. I was beginning to think you'd sleep all day. How do you feel?" "Sore," Willa admitted. "But alive. Thanks to you and to Mr." She realized she didn't know his last name. Price. Grayson Price. He's a rancher, has a spread about 5 miles north of Knights Ferry. Good man, even if he is stubborn as a mule. Mrs. Patterson said this with evident affection. "Now I've got breakfast ready. Think you can walk?" Willa stood, wobbling slightly, and Mrs. Patterson took her arm to steady her. Together they made their way into the main room, which served as both kitchen and living area. It was larger than the bedroom, with a big stone fireplace, a wooden table and chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies, and a sense of comfortable, masculine simplicity. Grayson stood by the stove, spatula in hand, and he turned when they entered. "Morning," he said, and his eyes did a quick inventory, checking her over like he might check an injured animal. "You look better. Got some color back." "Thanks to you," Willa said, her voice still rough. "I would have died out there if you hadn't found me." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Any decent person would have done the same. Sit down, eat something. You need food to get your strength back." Breakfast was bacon and eggs and fried potatoes, simple fare but hot and filling, and Willa ate more than she'd thought possible. While they ate, Mrs. Patterson explained that she lived in town but had come out yesterday evening to bring Grayson a Christmas basket from the church ladies, only to get caught in the storm herself. "Grayson was just heading out to check on his cattle when he found you," Mrs. Patterson said. "Fool notion, going out in that weather, but he said the herd was up in the north pasture and he was worried they'd freeze." "They're hardy," Grayson said mildly. "They found shelter in the trees like I figured they would, but I'm glad I went out when I did." He looked at Willa when he said it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "What were you doing out there?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her tone gentle but probing. "Knights Ferry's not a large town. If you'd been staying there, someone would have noticed you leaving." Willa's hand tightened on her fork. She'd known the question would come, had been dreading it, because how could she explain without explaining everything? Without telling them about Marcus and the murder and the fact that she was running for her life. "I was on the train," she said carefully. "From Sacramento. It stopped in Knights Ferry because of the snow, and I thought I could walk to the next town. I didn't realize how bad the storm was." It was true, as far as it went, but she could see the skepticism in Mrs. Patterson's eyes. No one in their right mind would try to walk anywhere in a blizzard, and they both knew it. "Were you running from something?" Grayson asked, his voice quiet but direct. Willa met his eyes, those dark, steady eyes that seemed to see too much, and made a decision. She couldn't tell them everything, not yet, maybe not ever, but she could give them some truth. "Yes," she said simply. "I was running." Mrs. Patterson and Grayson exchanged a look, and then Grayson nodded. "All right," he said. "That's all we need to know for now. You're safe here, Miss Sutherland. Willa Sutherland, Miss Sutherland. You're safe here, and you're welcome to stay until the weather clears and you figure out where you want to go. No one's going to hurt you under this roof." The simple certainty in his words made Willa's throat tight with emotion. She'd been running for days, terrified and alone, and now here was this stranger offering her sanctuary without question or condition. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." "Don't need repayment," Grayson said, going back to his breakfast. "It's Christmas." Seemed fitting to help someone in need. Christmas. She'd almost forgotten. Back in Sacramento, the boarding house would have been decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, and the ladies would have been preparing a special dinner. But that life was gone now, as thoroughly as if it had never existed. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said briskly, breaking the somber mood, "if you're staying, you'll need proper clothes. Those things you came in are ruined, I'm afraid. We'll see what we can find in town." "I don't have much money," Willa admitted. "We'll figure something out," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "For now, you can wear some of Grayson's old things. He's got shirts and trousers that'll swim on you, but they're better than nothing." The storm continued through Christmas Day, keeping them all trapped inside. Mrs. Patterson cooked a simple Christmas dinner of salt pork and beans and dried apple pie, and they ate by lamplight while the wind rattled the windows. It should have been depressing, Willa thought, spending Christmas Day with strangers in a tiny house in the middle of nowhere, but instead she felt an odd contentment. Maybe it was just the relief of being alive and warm, or maybe it was the way Grayson and Mrs. Patterson included her in their conversation, asking her opinion about everything from politics to the best way to make biscuits, treating her like she belonged. After dinner, Mrs. Patterson produced a deck of cards and taught Willa a game called 7-Up, and they played for matches while Grayson sat by the fire and read from a book of poetry. His voice was surprisingly good for reading aloud, she discovered, rich and expressive, and she found herself listening more to him than paying attention to her cards. "You're going to lose all your matches if you don't focus," Mrs. Patterson said with amusement, and Willa blushed, caught. As the evening wore on, Mrs. Patterson began to nod off in her chair, and Grayson gently suggested she take the bed while he and Willa sat up. "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said, but her yawn betrayed her. "I'm perfectly fine." "You've been up since before dawn, and you're not as young as you used to be," Grayson said, his tone teasing but affectionate. "Go on. We'll be fine out here." After some more grumbling, Mrs. Patterson retired, leaving Willa and Grayson alone in the firelight. The wind had died down some, and through the window Willa could see stars appearing between the clouds. "Looks like it's clearing," Grayson said, following her gaze. "Roads should be passable in a day or two." "That's good," Willa said, though a part of her felt something that might have been disappointment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Finally, Grayson spoke. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from," he said. "But I want you to know if there's trouble following you, I can help. I've got friends, people who know how to handle difficult situations." Willa looked at him, at his serious face in the firelight, and felt something shift in her chest. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. When I found you in the snow yesterday, my first thought was that God had answered a prayer I didn't even know I'd been praying. I've been alone out here for 5 years, Miss Sutherland, ever since my wife died in childbirth. I told myself I was content with the solitude, that I didn't need anyone, but then I saw you lying there in the snow and something in me just knew. You were meant to be found. You were meant to be here. Willa's breath caught. That's a strange thing to say to someone you just met. I know it is. He looked at her then, his dark eyes intense. I don't expect you to feel the same. Hell, I don't even know what I'm feeling myself. But when I carried you inside and I thought you might die, I realized how much I wanted you to live. Not just because it's the decent thing, but because the world would be a poorer place without you in it. She should have been frightened by such words, by the intensity of his emotion, but instead Willa felt something warm unfurling in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "You said you prayed," she said softly. "What did you pray for?" "A lot of things over the years. For my wife to live, but that prayer went unanswered. For the ranch to prosper, for guidance, for purpose." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And lately, though I didn't realize it until yesterday, I've been praying for companionship, for someone to share this life with. When I found you, my first thought was, here she is. Here's the gift I've been praying for." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. In her world, men had been cruel or indifferent or dangerous, but Grayson Price was something different. He was offering her not just shelter, but something infinitely more precious. Hope for a future she'd thought was impossible. "I'm not a gift," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm a woman in trouble, running from something I don't know how to face. You shouldn't tie yourself to me. It's not fair to you." "Let me be the judge of what's fair to me," he said gently. "And for what it's worth, I don't think God makes mistakes. If he led me to you, then there's a reason." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing easily despite the strange circumstances. Willa found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about growing up in an orphanage in St. Louis, about learning to sew as a way to earn her keep, about the desperate loneliness that had defined most of her life. She didn't tell him about Marcus or the murder, not yet, but she gave him enough truth that he could understand why she'd been willing to risk death in a blizzard rather than stay where she was. In turn, Grayson told her about his life, about growing up in Texas, about coming west after the war to make a new start, about meeting and marrying a sweet girl named Sarah who died giving birth to their stillborn son. His grief was palpable even 5 years later, but there was acceptance in it too, a sense that he'd made his peace with loss. "I never thought I'd want to open my heart again," he admitted. "It hurt too much when I lost Sarah, but life has a way of surprising you." When they finally went to their separate sleeping places, Grayson bedding down on the floor near the fire and Willa taking the sofa, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about everything he'd said. She should be planning her next move, figuring out how to get far away from Marcus Webb and the danger he represented. Instead, she was thinking about dark eyes and a scarred jaw, and the way Grayson's voice had sounded when he called her a gift. The next day dawned clear and bright, the sun sparkling off the snow like scattered diamonds. Mrs. Patterson insisted on returning to town, declaring that people would talk if she stayed any longer, and Grayson hitched up a sleigh to drive her home. "You behave yourself, Mrs. Patterson said sternly to Grayson, though her eyes twinkled. "And you," she added to Willa, "you take care. If you need anything, you send word into town and I'll come." After they left, Willa found herself alone in the house for the first time. She spent the morning tidying up, washing dishes and sweeping floors, small ways to repay Grayson's kindness. She also took stock of her situation. Her few belongings were still on the train, presumably, including the small amount of money she'd saved. She had nothing but the borrowed nightgown and the clothes Grayson had left out for her. An old flannel shirt and canvas trousers that she had to roll up at the ankles and cinch tight at the waist. She was standing in front of the small mirror above the washstand, trying to tame her tangled hair when she heard the sleigh return. A moment later, Grayson came in, stamping snow from his boots, and stopped when he saw her. "You didn't have to clean," he said. "I wanted to. It's the least I could do." He hung up his coat and hat, then came further into the room. "Mrs. Patterson says half the town is snowed in, but the train's supposed to start running again tomorrow or the next day. She also said to tell you that if you need work, the school teacher is looking for someone to help with the children. Mrs. Patterson vouched for you." Willa's heart sank. The train running again meant she should leave, should keep moving, put as much distance as possible between herself and Sacramento. But the thought of leaving made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "That's kind of her," she said carefully. Grayson studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "You don't want to leave." It wasn't a question, but Willa answered anyway. "I don't know what I want. I know what I should do, which is keep moving, but I'm so tired of running." "Then stop running," he said simply. "Stay here. At least for a while. See if the trouble you're afraid of actually shows up, and if it does, we'll face it together." "You don't understand what you're offering," Willa said, her voice urgent. "The man I'm running from, he's dangerous. He has money and influence, and he won't stop looking for me." "Why is he looking for you?" Willa took a deep breath. She'd known this moment would come, known she'd have to tell him eventually if she was going to stay. "Because I saw him kill a woman, and he knows I saw." The words fell into the quiet room like stones into still water. Grayson's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. She told him about working at the boarding house, about Marcus Webb with his expensive suits and cold eyes, about the girl he'd killed, and the way he'd smiled at Willa when he'd realized she'd witnessed it. She told him about running, about the train, about deciding to walk into the storm rather than wait where Marcus might find her. When she finished, Grayson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This Marcus Webb, is he the law?" "No, but he owns people who are. He has a business, something to do with shipping and imports, and he has money. Lots of it. The girl he killed, she was nobody, just a woman who worked in the district. Who's going to believe my word over his?" "You'd be surprised," Grayson said. "But that's not the important question right now. The important question is whether you want to keep running or whether you want to make a stand." "A stand?" Willa stared at him. "Against Marcus Webb? I told you he's powerful. He's powerful in Sacramento. Out here, money doesn't mean as much as a man's character. And if you're willing to testify to what you saw, if you're willing to face him, then I know people who can help. The sheriff in Knights Ferry is a good man, and he's got connections throughout the territory." Willa felt hope and fear warring in her chest. "Why would you do this for me? Why would you risk making an enemy of someone like Marcus?" Grayson crossed the room until he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because what I said last night was true," he said quietly. "You're the gift I've been praying for, Willa Sutherland, and I don't intend to let anyone take you away. Not Marcus Webb, not fear, not anything. You're safe here, and if he comes looking for you, he'll have to go through me first." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, made Willa's throat tight with emotion. She'd been taking care of herself for so long, fighting alone for so long, that the idea of someone standing beside her felt almost impossible to believe. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," she whispered. "Then we'll make sure there's no trouble to bring," Grayson said. "We'll go into town tomorrow and talk to Sheriff Hollies. We'll lay out everything you know and we'll let him decide what to do. But no more running, Willa. You run now, you'll be running for the rest of your life." She knew he was right. Knew that Marcus would never stop looking for her as long as she was alive and free, because she was the only witness to what he'd done. But the thought of standing up to him, of trusting the law to protect her, was terrifying. As if sensing her fear, Grayson reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "I know we've only known each other 2 days, and you probably think I'm crazy for feeling the way I do, but I meant what I said. You were meant to be here. We were meant to find each other, and I'll stand by you no matter what comes." Willa looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his sun-browned fingers against her pale ones, and felt something inside her settle. Maybe it was foolish to trust him so quickly. Maybe she was making another mistake. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't feel alone. "All right," she said softly. "I'll stay, and I'll talk to the sheriff." The smile that broke across Grayson's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, warming her from the inside out. "Good," he said. "That's good." They went into Knights Ferry the next day, the sleigh runners cutting smooth tracks through the packed snow. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of buildings. A general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, and the sheriff's office. People were out shoveling walks and clearing snow from roofs, and several of them waved as Grayson drove past. "Everyone knows everyone here," Grayson explained. "It's that kind of town. Folks look out for each other." Sheriff Hollies turned out to be a grizzled man in his 50s with keen gray eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened without interrupting as Willa told her story, his expression giving nothing away, and when she finished, he leaned back in his chair and was silent for a long moment. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Sutherland," he said finally. "You're saying Marcus Webb, the shipping magnate, murdered a woman in cold blood." "I know how it sounds," Willa said, "but I saw it. I saw her body, saw the blood on his hands." "And you ran instead of going to the law in Sacramento." "I was scared. I thought no one would believe me." Sheriff Hollies nodded slowly. "Can't say I blame you for that. Webb's got a reputation as a upstanding businessman, and you're, begging your pardon, a nobody. But that doesn't mean you're wrong." He drummed his fingers on his desk. "Here's what I'll do. I've got a friend who's a U.S. Marshal stationed in San Francisco. I'll send him a wire, lay out what you've told me, and see what he says. If there have been other disappearances, other women who have gone missing around Webb, then your testimony might be the piece of evidence they need." "And if there haven't been?" Willa asked. "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But in the meantime, you stay close to Grayson. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you see anyone suspicious, anyone asking questions about a woman matching your description, you come find me immediately." "Understood," Willa nodded, relief flooding through her. It wasn't a solution, not yet, but it was a start. As they left the sheriff's office, Grayson took her arm. "See, that wasn't so bad. He didn't say he believed me. He didn't say he didn't either. Sheriff Hollies is a cautious man, but he's fair. If there's evidence to back up your story, he'll find it." They spent the rest of the day in town, with Grayson introducing Willa to what felt like half the population of Knights Ferry. Mrs. Patterson made good on her promise to find Willa proper clothes, appearing with a bundle of dresses and undergarments that she claimed were extras from the church charity box, though Willa suspected the older woman had purchased them new. The school teacher, a young woman named Miss Emily Carson, was delighted at the prospect of having help with the children, and they arranged for Willa to start after the new year. "Are you sure you want to work?" Grayson asked as they drove back to the ranch. "You don't have to, you know." "You're welcome at the ranch for as long as you want to stay." "I need to earn my keep," Willa said firmly. "And I like children. It'll be good to have something to do." What she didn't say was that having her own money, her own independence, felt important. She'd been dependent on others for too long, first the orphanage, then the boarding house, and now Grayson. She needed to know she could take care of herself, even as she was learning to let someone help her. Over the next few weeks, Willa settled into a routine that felt almost like a normal life. She spent her days helping with the school children, teaching them their letters and numbers and listening to them read aloud, and her evenings at Grayson's ranch, helping with cooking and cleaning and gradually learning the rhythms of ranch life. Grayson hired a woman from town, Mrs. Chen, to come stay at the house as a chaperone, ensuring propriety. But as the days passed, Willa found herself caring less and less about propriety, and more about the man who'd saved her life. Grayson was unlike any man she'd ever known. He was patient and kind, with a quiet strength that made her feel safe. But he was also funny and thoughtful, full of surprising insights and observations. He read constantly, everything from agricultural journals to poetry, and he loved to discuss what he'd read over dinner. He treated his animals with respect and his land with reverence, and he had a way of looking at Willa that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. She found herself falling in love with him gradually, the way snow accumulates, one flake at a time until suddenly the world is transformed. It was in the way he always served her first at meals, in the way he listened when she talked about her day, in the way his eyes lit up when she walked into a room. It was in the small kindnesses, the way he'd leave wildflowers on the kitchen table or repair a broken chair without being asked. It was in the moments of quiet companionship, sitting by the fire after dinner, not needing to talk, just being together. And she could see that he felt the same. It was there in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the slight hitch in his breath when their hands accidentally touched, in the care he took to always be respectful, to never push her or make her uncomfortable. He was giving her time, she realized, time to heal and to trust and to figure out what she wanted. 6 weeks after Christmas, Sheriff Hollis called them back to his office. The marshal from San Francisco had written back, and his news was both encouraging and troubling. "There have been 3 other women who have disappeared in the last 2 years, Sheriff Hollis said, laying out the marshal's letter on his desk. All of them had some connection to Marcus Webb, either working in establishments he frequented or, in one case, working directly for him. The bodies were never found, but there were suspicious circumstances in each disappearance." "So Willa was telling the truth," Grayson said, his voice tight. "Looks that way. The marshal wants Miss Sutherland to come to San Francisco to make a formal statement. With her testimony, they might be able to build a case against Webb." Willa felt her stomach drop. Go back to San Francisco, to California's largest city, where Marcus Webb had the most influence. "Is that safe?" The marshal promises protection. "You'd be housed in a secure location and there'd be officers with you at all times. But I won't lie to you, Miss Sutherland. It's a risk. Webb's a dangerous man and he's got resources." "When would they want her to come?" Grayson asked. "As soon as possible. There's a train heading west next week. The marshal suggested she be on it." Willa looked at Grayson, saw the worry in his eyes, and felt her own fear reflected back at her. But beneath the fear was something else, determination. She'd run once and it had nearly killed her. She wouldn't run again. "I'll go," she said. "If my testimony can stop him from hurting anyone else, I'll go." "Then I'm going with you," Grayson said immediately. "You can't just leave your ranch." "I can and I will. I've got hired hands who can look after things for a few weeks, and I'm not letting you face this alone." "Mr. Price, that's not necessary," Sheriff Hollies began, but Grayson cut him off. "It is to me," he said, his voice firm. "Willa's under my protection, and that doesn't end just because we're getting on a train." The sheriff looked between them, a slight smile tugging at his weathered face. "I can see there's no arguing with you. All right then. Both of you will go. I'll wire the marshal and let him know." The week before they left passed in a blur of preparation. Grayson made arrangements with his foreman, a capable man named Tom who'd worked the ranch for years, and Willa said goodbye to her students and to Mrs. Patterson, who hugged her fiercely and made her promise to be careful. "That man loves you," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, nodding toward where Grayson was loading bags into the wagon. "I've known him since he first came to Knights Ferry, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even Sarah." "I love him too," Willa admitted, the first time she'd said the words aloud. "But I don't know if we have a future, not with this hanging over my head." "Then you make sure you come back," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You make sure you both come back and you build that future together. God didn't bring you two together just to tear you apart." The journey to San Francisco took 2 days, the train cutting through the winter landscape with mechanical efficiency. Grayson had booked them separate compartments, maintaining propriety, but they spent most of the journey together, talking about everything and nothing. Willa told him about her dreams, the life she'd imagined before everything fell apart, and Grayson told her about his plans for the ranch, the improvements he wanted to make, the legacy he hoped to build. "I always thought I'd have children," he admitted as they watched the scenery roll past. "Sons and daughters to carry on after I'm gone. But after Sarah died, I couldn't imagine trying again, couldn't imagine loving someone enough to risk that kind of loss." "And now?" Willa asked softly. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "Now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe some things are worth the risk." Her breath caught, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the air between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Then Grayson reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when you've given your testimony and Marcus Webb is behind bars where he belongs, I'm going to ask you something, and I hope you'll say yes." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What are you going to ask me?" "You'll find out when the time comes," he said with a small smile. "But for now, know that whatever happens in San Francisco, whatever we have to face, we're facing it together. And nothing, not Marcus Webb or the law or anything else, is going to change how I feel about you." She wanted to kiss him then, wanted it with an intensity that surprised her, but they were in a public train car with other passengers and it wasn't appropriate. So instead, she squeezed his hand and said, "I feel the same way about you, Grayson Price, and when this is over, I'll give you my answer." They arrived in San Francisco on a gray afternoon, the city shrouded in fog that rolled in from the bay. A marshal was waiting for them at the station, a lean man with a sandy mustache who introduced himself as Marshal James Garrett. "Miss Sutherland, Mr. Price, thank you for coming," he said, shaking their hands. "I've arranged for you to stay at a boarding house in a quiet part of the city. It's run by a former officer's widow, very discreet, and we'll have men watching the place at all times." "When will I need to give my testimony?" Willa asked. "We're building the case now, gathering evidence. It'll likely be a week, maybe 2, before we're ready to bring charges. In the meantime, I need you to stay out of sight. Marcus Webb has people everywhere in this city, and if he learns you're here, he'll do everything in his power to silence you." The boarding house was exactly as Marshal Garrett had described, quiet, respectable, and secure. Mrs. Anderson, the proprietress, showed them to their rooms and promised that no one would know of their presence. The waiting was hard. Willa had imagined she'd give her testimony immediately and they'd be able to return to Knights Ferry. But instead they were trapped in the boarding house, unable to go out, unable to do anything but wait. Grayson spent his days reading or writing letters to his foreman, checking on the ranch, while Willa helped Mrs. Anderson with cooking and mending, needing something to keep her hands busy. In the evenings, they'd sit together in the small parlor, talking or playing cards, and Willa found herself treasuring these moments of peace. She knew the storm was coming, knew that soon she'd have to face Marcus Webb and relive the nightmare of what she'd witnessed. But for now, she had this: Grayson's steady presence, the warmth of the fire, the illusion of safety. 10 days after they arrived in San Francisco, Marshal Garrett came to see them with news. "We've gathered enough evidence to bring charges," he said, his face grim. "Besides Miss Sutherland's testimony, we've found 2 witnesses who can place Webb with one of the other missing women on the night she disappeared. We're going to arrest him tomorrow morning." "What do you need from me?" Willa asked. "You'll need to come to the courthouse and give a formal deposition. The defense will likely try to discredit you, so be prepared for that. But with the other evidence, we have a strong case." That night, Willa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through everything she would say over and over in her mind. Around midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door. "Willa, are you awake?" Grayson's voice, low and concerned. She got up and opened the door. He stood in the hallway in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, and she could see the worry in his eyes. "I saw your light was still on," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "Tomorrow, when I have to face him, when I have to tell everyone what I saw, I'm scared I'll fall apart." Grayson stepped into the room, propriety forgotten, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. "You're the bravest person I know," he said into her hair. "You survived things that would have broken most people, and you kept going. Tomorrow's just one more thing to survive, and I'll be right there with you. I'll be in that courthouse, and every time you feel scared, you look at me. You remember that you're not alone." She tilted her head back to look at him, and the expression on his face took her breath away. There was love there, pure and simple, and something else: pride. He was proud of her, she realized, proud of her strength and her courage. "Grayson," she whispered, and then she rose on her toes and kissed him. For a moment he froze, surprised, but then his arms tightened around her and he was kissing her back, his lips warm and gentle against hers. It wasn't a kiss of passion but of promise, of 2 people finding each other in the darkness and holding on. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willa Sutherland," he said. "I know it's too soon, and I know we barely know each other, but I love you. And when this is over, I'm going to marry you if you'll have me." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you. I love you too." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, and when Grayson finally left to return to his own room, Willa felt calmer than she had in days. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. The courthouse was an imposing building of stone and brick, and Willa felt her courage falter as they climbed the steps. But Grayson's hand was firm on her elbow, and Marshal Garrett was on her other side, and she forced herself to keep walking. Inside, they were ushered into a small room where a stenographer waited. Over the next several hours, Willa told her story again, every detail she could remember about that night in Sacramento. The lawyer asking the questions was thorough and occasionally aggressive, clearly playing devil's advocate to prepare her for what the defense would throw at her, but Willa held her ground. She told the truth, simply and clearly, and when she was done, the lawyer sat back with a satisfied expression. "That's good," he said. "That's very good. Miss Sutherland, you're a compelling witness. I believe the jury will find you credible." "When will the trial be?" Grayson asked. "Assuming Webb doesn't plead guilty, which he won't, probably 3 to 4 months. We'll need Miss Sutherland to return for the trial, but until then, she's free to go." Willa felt dizzy with relief. "It's really over. I can leave." "For now," Marshal Garrett said. "We've got Webb in custody and he'll stay there until trial. You're safe, Miss Sutherland." The journey back to Knights Ferry felt like waking from a bad dream. With every mile the train carried them east, away from San Francisco and Marcus Webb. Willa felt lighter. She and Grayson talked about the future now, making plans in a way they hadn't dared before. They'd get married, they decided, as soon as they got back. A simple ceremony, just close friends, and then Willa would move into the ranch permanently. "I'll add on to the house," Grayson said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Another bedroom, maybe 2, for the children we'll have. And we'll fix up the barn, get some dairy cows. You said you wanted to learn to make cheese." "I did say that," Willa agreed, laughing. "Though I'm not sure I'd be any good at it." "We'll learn together," Grayson said, taking her hand. "Everything we'll learn together." They arrived back in Knights Ferry on a bright spring morning, the snow finally melted and the first green shoots appearing in the fields. Tom, the foreman, met them at the station with the wagon, and his weathered face broke into a wide grin when he saw them. "Good to have you back, boss," he said to Grayson. "Ranch is still standing, though we had some trouble with coyotes last week." "We'll deal with it," Grayson said. "Tom, I'd like you to meet Willa Sutherland. She's going to be my wife." Tom's eyebrows went up, but he touched his hat politely. "Madam, congratulations to you both." Mrs. Patterson was waiting at the ranch, having let herself in to air out the house and stock the larder, and she enveloped Willa in a crushing hug the moment she walked through the door. "Thank the Lord you're safe," she said, her eyes damp. "I've been praying every day since you left. Now, tell me everything." Over coffee and fresh baked bread, they told her about San Francisco, about the deposition and Marcus Webb's arrest, and about their plans to marry. "About time," Mrs. Patterson said with satisfaction. "I've already started planning the ceremony in my head. We'll have it at the church, of course, and I'll make your dress, Willa. Something simple but elegant." "Mrs. Patterson, you don't have to," Willa protested, but the older woman waved her off. "Nonsense. You're like a daughter to me now, and every bride deserves a proper dress. Now, when were you thinking?" "Next month." "I was thinking next week," Grayson said, and both women turned to stare at him. "What? We've wasted enough time already." "I want Willa to be my wife, and I don't see any reason to wait." Willa felt warmth spread through her chest. "Next week sounds perfect," she said. They were married the following Saturday in the small white church in Knights Ferry, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson had worked miracles, producing a dress of soft blue calico with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Willa wore wildflowers in her hair. Grayson stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. And when the preacher asked if he took this woman to be his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong. The wedding breakfast was held at the church hall, with enough food to feed an army and music provided by a fiddler from one of the neighboring ranches. Willa danced with Grayson and with Sheriff Hollies, and even with Tom the foreman, who proved surprisingly light on his feet, and she couldn't remember ever being so happy. As evening fell, Grayson drove them back to the ranch in the wagon, and Willa leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars come out one by one. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I ever thought possible," she said truthfully. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Grayson made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and careful, aware that this was her first time, and he whispered words of love against her skin as he showed her all the ways two people could be close. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Willa felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. This was home, she realized. Not a place, but a person. Grayson was her home. The months that followed were the happiest of Willa's life. She threw herself into learning the ins and outs of ranch life, helping with everything from cooking for the hired hands to mending fences to tending the vegetable garden she planted behind the house. She continued working at the school part-time, finding joy in teaching the children, and she became more deeply woven into the fabric of Knights Ferry's community. Summer arrived, hot and golden, and with it came a letter from Marshal Garrett. Marcus Webb's trial was set for August, and Willa would need to return to San Francisco to testify. "I'll come with you," Grayson said immediately when she told him. "The ranch needs you here," Willa protested. "It's haying season. Tom can handle it. You're more important than hay." So they made the journey to San Francisco again, this time as husband and wife, and Willa found that facing the prospect of the trial was easier with Grayson's ring on her finger and his solid presence beside her. The trial lasted 5 days. Willa testified on the third day, describing in detail what she'd seen that night in Sacramento. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table, his expression cold and arrogant, and once, when she was speaking, he leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer that made the man blanch. Willa refused to be intimidated. She looked at Grayson, sitting in the gallery, and drew strength from his steady gaze. The defense tried to tear her apart, suggesting she'd made up the story for attention or money, implying she was of questionable morals because she worked in a boarding house. But the prosecutor was ready for it, and he presented evidence that corroborated Willa's account. Bloodstains found in Webb's room that matched the missing woman's blood type, witness statements placing Webb with other victims shortly before they disappeared, and most damning of all, a letter found in Webb's office that implicitly threatened the woman Willa had seen him kill. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all charges. Willa cried when she heard it, tears of relief and release, and Grayson held her as the courtroom erupted in noise around them. It was over. Finally, truly over. Marcus Webb was sentenced to hang, and Willa felt no pleasure in it, only a deep, bone-weary relief that he'd never hurt anyone else. They left San Francisco the next day and returned to Knights Ferry, to the ranch and the life they were building together. That fall, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Grayson over breakfast one morning, watching his face cycle through shock and then pure, incandescent joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Willa asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, coming around the table to pull her into his arms. "You've given me everything, Willa. A reason to live again, a future to look forward to, and now a child. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God every day that I found you in that snow." Their son was born the following May, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Grayson's father, and he was welcomed into the world by what felt like half of Knights Ferry. Mrs. Patterson came to stay for 2 weeks after the birth, helping Willa learn to care for the baby and offering advice with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything. Watching Grayson with their son, seeing the tenderness in his face as he held the tiny, squirming bundle, Willa felt her heart might burst with happiness. This was what she dreamed of in those dark days at the orphanage, those lonely years at the boarding house. a family of her own, people to love and be loved by in return. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Margaret, and then another son, James, 3 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious when Willa first arrived was now filled with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of children. Grayson added on those extra bedrooms he'd promised, and they hired more help at the ranch to manage the growing herd and the fields. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices dropped and they had to tighten their belts. Samuel had a bout of scarlet fever when he was 5 that terrified them both, and Margaret broke her arm falling out of a tree when she was 7. But through it all, Willa and Grayson faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grayson took Willa back to the spot where he'd found her in the snow. A decade had passed, but Willa could still remember that night with perfect clarity, the cold, the fear, the certainty that she was going to die. And then Grayson's voice cutting through the storm, his arms lifting her to safety. "You ever regret it?" She asked him as they stood there, the summer sun warm on their faces. "Taking in a stranger, tying yourself to all my troubles." Grayson turned to her, his face older now, weathered by sun and work, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had first captured her heart. "Regret finding the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. "Willa, that night when I found you, I told you that you were the gift I'd been praying for. That was truer than I even knew. You gave me back my life. You gave me a reason to hope again, to love again. Every single day with you has been a gift, and I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat." She kissed him then, there in the meadow where he'd saved her life, and she thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment. The fear and the running, the trial and the triumph, the children and the ranch and the life they'd built together from nothing but faith and love. "I love you, Grayson Price," she said against his lips. "Thank you for finding me." "I love you too," he said, "and I always will." 20 more years passed, and the ranch prospered. Samuel grew into a fine young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and he eventually married a girl from Sacramento and brought her home to the ranch. Margaret became a teacher, following in Miss Carson's footsteps, and opened a school for girls in San Francisco. James, the youngest, had his mother's restless spirit, and he went east to study law, determined to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Grayson's hair turned gray, and Willa found silver strands in her own dark hair, but their love never dimmed. They grew old together, watching their children have children of their own, watching Knights Ferry grow from a small frontier town into a thriving community. On a warm summer evening in 1913, 30 years after that Christmas Eve when Grayson had found Willa in the snow, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the hills. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, and Willa thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment. "You remember," she said softly, "when you told me I was the gift you'd been praying for." "I remember," Grayson said. "It was true then, and it's true now." "You were my gift too," Willa said. "You saved my life that night, but you did more than that. You gave me a future, you gave me hope, you gave me love." Grayson squeezed her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "We gave that to each other," he said. "That's what love is, Willa. It's two people saving each other, over and over again." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, and the sound made Willa smile. This was what they'd built together, not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. "I'd do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every hardship, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. I'd do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "Me too," Grayson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "From that first moment I saw you in the snow, I knew. You were mine and I was yours, and nothing that came after ever changed that." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the girl she'd been. Alone, terrified, running from a nightmare. That girl had thought she was going to die in the snow, but instead she'd found life. She'd found love. She'd found home. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Thank you," Grayson whispered back. "For saying yes." They sat there as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The wind carried the scent of summer grass and wildflowers, and in the distance, an owl called out to its mate. Inside the house, their family gathered, the sound of their voices a warm and welcoming chorus. This was their happily ever after, earned through trials and tears and the simple, steadfast choice to love each other every single day. From that frozen Christmas Eve to this peaceful summer night, they had walked through life hand in hand, and they would continue walking together until their last breath. The gift Grayson had prayed for had turned out to be so much more than he'd ever imagined. And the gift Willa had received, though she hadn't known to pray for it, had transformed her life in ways she could never have dreamed. Together, they had created a love story for the ages, born in a blizzard and forged in faith, a testament to the power of hope and the enduring strength of the human heart. And as they sat there on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure. They had found their forever in each other, and that was the greatest gift of all.